Fantastic. Yeah, so just before I jump into the presentation, since I know we went through the introductions quickly, just to give the founders a bit of a reminder of the context, potentially of my slightly critical feedback, and why sometimes you'll see me throughout the cohort being a little bit more perhaps negative than optimistic, is mostly because I'm coming from a venture background. So just like you, I've been an entrepreneur before, and I've also gone through the founding journey, but now most of my time is spent either coaching or working with investors. And investors are historically very well known as very skeptical people. And there's a very high opportunity cost for an investor to support your business, which is why to really make sure that you find the right investors for you to really take your purpose onwards and to really grow your business, you need to be the best you can be. So getting as much criticism and going through that at the very beginning of your journey, such as with Founders Institute, is really important. Now today, I'll be speaking more from the perspective of skill sets that we really teach to all the investors that we work with, in terms of them then passing it on to you. And it's really important to make sure that there is this kind of vision alignment with them right from the beginning. So when you are going to be speaking to anybody, whether it's a partner, whether it's a future investor, whether it's a future employee for your team, it's really, really important that right from the beginning, you've sorted out your founder vision and your problem statement. So with that all said, I'll jump right into it. Okay, so firstly, what are we going to cover today? We're going to range through a couple of topics. We're going to touch on the general idea of what a startup vision is and explain to you why this is different from a social enterprise, a nonprofit, or a small business. We'll explain the differences between all of those businesses so you get a bit of an idea. We'll touch a little bit on what you should know about future funders, and then move through a couple of examples just so you can know and understand how to work through getting a really strong vision and problem statement for your ideal startup. So firstly, let's touch on what is a startup. A startup vision is really something that is directly related towards an aspiration for a company. It's describing where the company is going if your company is successful. And when you are pitching your company to me, it doesn't matter if you're pitching me for money now, or you're pitching me for partnership, or you're pitching me to advise or somehow support your business, you should be telling me that your vision is something that's really ambitious. What does that mean? That means that you should be working towards something that was very, very specific. For instance, Tesla is a really good company with a very strong traditional vision statement. Their vision statement is to create the most compelling car company of the 21st century by driving the world's transition to electric vehicles. It's a very specific vision. It is very, very ambitious, almost borderline too ambitious. However, it's very specific to where they plug into that vision. Tesla is essentially stating to you that if it succeeds in this mission statement, in the vision of where they're going, that they will be able to accelerate the world's transition from current energy resources to sustainable energy. And this will allow it to achieve this vision of creating the most compelling car company of the 21st century, something that it may well already be on the path to do. Now, let's go into the specifics. How does this specific concept of vision and direction really vary? It's going to vary a lot for even a number of you. So not all of you are going to have the same background. Some of you are going to have a background more into building a startup enterprise. Others are going to be focused on small business, and yet others of you might end up as an SME or perhaps even a nonprofit. What does this mean? Well, if you think about it like a startup, essentially, what is the difference between what a startup CEO is doing and what a CEO of a large enterprise is doing? It's very, very similar. In both cases, the CEO of a startup or a major enterprise is coming up with a stellar business idea. They're gaining interest from large players in the industry. They're raising capital, and then they're using this money to prove a business model in the market. But when you break it down to these particular basics, it's really easy to see that similarity between what all of you are doing and the biggest players in the world. For instance, the Coursera's or the Udemy's in the edtech space, the Facebooks or the Twitters in the social media space, or major players in the retail and e-commerce economy. So what would be a good definition then for you if you are trying to find this ideal problem statement for your own business, if you are indeed a startup? And I should preface this to say that most of this presentation is oriented towards those of you who choose to be the startup going forward rather than the small business. Well, a startup is essentially someone who's trying to create a repeatable and scalable business model. You're not only searching to prove your business model and execute on it, but you're aiming to do so with a major impact on your given market. If that given market is the consumer supply of water, then you plan to have a major impact of that market. If that market is the consumption of a particular beverage, then you plan to have a major impact on this market. It doesn't matter which market you choose, it's just really important to have that ambition. So this is categorically different from those of you who are going to choose to build a small business or a typical firm. A small business isn't in search of a business model that's going to work at some point down the line. If you imagine a conceptual example, WeWork, it's a shareable co-working space. Now, WeWork is a startup. The WeWork business model doesn't yet work. It doesn't actually make money. Every WeWork office in the world loses money. However, it's a successful startup because it has grown to serve a very large number of people. It has a huge market. It is generating incredible revenues, and it has raised venture capital financing multiple times. This is not the same as success for a small business, because a small business needs to have the business model working from day one. It's a self-sustaining organization that's focused on generating revenue right away. If you opened a shop and you weren't making any money, you would not be a shopkeeper, you would be broke. So this is why it's very important to distinguish which direction you choose very early on in your development. Now, if you are building a startup and you want to raise funding and you're going through this as a means to an end, you believe that your vision is going to be the first part on your journey towards at some point raising institutional capital, then you should listen more attentively to what's to come. Firstly, it's important to know that a vision statement is important for three core reasons. One, it's going to help investors and potential funders see the market opportunity of what you're building. Many of you are building something that isn't seen before. That's why you're building a startup. That's why you've seen the problem. You've identified that there's a problem of an absence. There's a need, a demand-driven problem. And that means that nobody has seen precedent. However, most investors and most funders work on precedent. They want to see proof of something before they give you their capital. So what your vision statement is giving them a bit of an idea. You're getting them a way to see the future. Secondly, it's showing them and showing yourself your future customers. Why and how is your startup going to be different from others in a competitive market? If you're building a ride-sharing service, how are you going to be different from Bolt? How are you going to be different from Uber or some other businesses? Finally, it's important to help you, your investors, and your partners really strategize whether your business fits into what they plan to work with or invest into in the future. This is going to be incredibly important, as you'll touch on later on in the program, and it's really important right from the beginning to have a very strong vision statement. No, your vision statement isn't going to be fixed in place forever. You can evolve it, yes. However, it's important to get started right from the beginning with something that people can both empathize with and wish to support. So what should you be doing if you do believe you have a great idea and a great vision now that you're working towards your problem statement? First step is identifying if it actually is solving a problem. Does a problem exist? A lot of people as entrepreneurs make the mistake of seeing a problem that's very niche to your particular viewpoint. Try to place yourself in other people's shoes. Try to imagine if the common public, if somebody who is not in the industry, who is not in this focus, can see that there's a problem. Is this problem something that exists now, or is it solving a problem that will exist later? The best way to conceptually imagine this is if you go and ask your parents, or you go and ask their parents, somebody who is almost certainly going to be distanced from the same environment you live in right now. Are they going to be able to tell you, if they had the context with which you are operating, that this is a problem that needs to be fixed now? Or would they say that this seems like something trivial? Because if they, as a general member of the public who has your support, who is backing you as your family, still doesn't believe there's a problem, then perhaps you're too early in trying to develop this idea. Now, if the problem does exist, and you have proven that it exists by speaking to a variety of different individuals and seeing that from various perspectives, they all believe that there is a problem, is this a problem that someone without industry experience would recognize? So beyond just speaking to your friends, your colleagues, people who are going to give you positive affirmation, speak to somebody who hasn't got that experience. Try to get their feedback on this problem. If not, the market may not be ready. Now, let's imagine you've gone through those steps. You've managed to prove that there is a current problem. You're solving something that exists now. It's already a significant problem, and others around you are recognizing it. Let's move ahead. So now that you have a problem, fantastic. What should you be thinking about next? Are you ready to build a startup? Well, not necessarily. A number of you need to pass a number of different benchmarks before you get to the point where you have a fully operating startup business. So think about the immediate cause of this problem. So you have just a problem statement, right? Well, what is the immediate way to solve this problem? The immediate solution isn't always going to be the best solution. Let me tell you that from personal entrepreneurial experience. Jumping to what is just plugging the gap and trying to solve something is not always going to be the best solution for you to build this. It's not necessarily even have to be the best solution to the particular problem, but you need to really ideate thoroughly to understand what solution you're going to be providing. Remember, is your business something that's plugging the gap for this problem? Is it creating a new product? Is it connecting multiple products? Or is it just an add-on to a feature? Imagine fintech, for instance. Fintech has seen so much innovation on the continent, but yet if you look at a lot of startups, they really struggle with their vision statement to see whether they're just an add-on to something that already exists or whether they're entirely disrupting or changing the space. A lot of startups really try to preempt the trend. They try to predict something that will come in the future to your market, but that's not necessarily a good way to approach things. It's much easier to build something where there's already nascent demand, even if this demand doesn't yet recognize it, to try and really build something where there's needs-based entrepreneurship. So how would someone from an entirely different point of view try and solve this solution? You are going to all have a particular background. Maybe some of you are doctors, maybe some of you are engineers, consultants, business professionals, business owners, or product people. It doesn't matter. There's always going to be a different point of view. So you should always, when you're ideating around the potential good solution, the solution to commercialize, the solution to really focus on with your business, to ask somebody from an entirely different point of view, entirely different portion of life. Pick whichever category you feel fits to you and find somebody from another one and get their feedback on what your solution is doing. They are very likely to give you common sense feedback to see whether the solution actually fits. And it's very likely that your first solution, your first 5 solutions, your first 10 solutions you think of aren't going to be the perfect fit, whether it's from a feasibility point of view or whether it's from a general adaptability point of view. So then you need to really start thinking about the root causes that led to this problem. So if we're talking about a problem of, for instance, poor graduation rates, if we're talking about a problem of non-certifiability of candidates, if we're talking about a problem of inaccessibility of transport, all of these are just surface level problems. There is something that goes beyond that. There is something that has led to a shortage of a resource. There is something that's preventing current market players from solving this issue. So when you think about it, don't for 1 second imagine that you're the only person in the world who has thought of an idea. It's almost statistically impossible. What you might be is you might be the only person who's thought of an idea and taken the extra step towards actually solving it. So try to see what has been the prevailing issue that prevented people from taking that step. It's not just laziness or access to capital. There is something else. Maybe it's a knowledge gap. Maybe it's a resource gap. Maybe it's a partnership gap. And if you can bridge that with your solution, you're already going to be 100 steps ahead of somebody else who just sits on that idea and doesn't execute. So there's 2 ways that you can actually go about your solutions. And the way that I call these are buffer solutions against structural solutions. So let's just conceptually imagine that your problem is that you have a bathtub. Let's imagine the bathtub is the economy. The bathtub could be something else. The bathtub could be, or for instance, just any kind of metaphorical representation of a market that has particular issues. Well, there's 2 ways you can try and solve this kind of bathtub if it has a hole in it. You can try and put a plaster to try and cover this hole. You can try and put some cardboard or some other surface or plastic that will try and prevent the leakage from this bathtub if the water is leaving, or you can create a structural solution, something that changes or removes the underlying root cause. If in our analogy of this bath that is sinking or a bucket that has a hole in it that lets water through, if you try and approach it from a structural point of view, the best solution would be to change the bucket, or to create a new method of storing water, or to create a new surface that would prevent leakage forever. It wouldn't be to place this plaster or to place something else. And this is the same way how you should be approaching your business problems. If you recognize right now that your solution is a buffer solution, you should be aware that at some point, someone is going to come with that metaphorical bathtub. They're going to create something that's going to be so much more revolutionary than your solution because they're going to be structurally changing the game. They're not just creating a better taxi, they're changing the way taxis are interpreted in the real world. The best example of this are technologies like Netflix, for instance, that entirely changed the people's experience of viewing cinema and changing cinema to a home experience. That is a structural solution to a significant problem. So let's keep going. So let's conceptualize this problem. For instance, let's imagine we have plastic soccer water bottles. Most of you should be familiar with soccer or football, essentially a typical team sport. On a typical break, whether it's halftime or someone's tired, they have soccer water bottles. Most of the countries around the world use plastic ones. They are for short-term use, they are mass-produced, they leak, and often they result in wasted spending by soccer teams in preparation for sports matches. Now, these plastic soccer water bottles present in themselves a really bad product, which leads to a problem. So people have a problem with this. It's a financial problem because we can see that there's wasted spending by soccer teams, and it's a physical problem for those players who want water to be provided to them in a nice, easy bottle that's not going to break, that they can use again and again. So if a buffer solution in this case would be to create an anti-leak patch or a quick spare feature to just get an extra cap, an extra bottle, an extra feature. But this doesn't actually solve the problem. Solving the problem could be 2 things. It could be either structurally solving it by redefining how people consume water. For instance, a solution that someone has come up with are biodegradable water droplets. You don't even need the bottle in the first place. You can eat the water. Secondly, another solution is potentially really going towards having some kind of metallic solution. So let's jump into some further examples. So imagine you had a structural solution with this metallic water bottle that didn't break. Now you've really changed the perception. You're not changing just the experience, but you've changed the entire perception. Imagine you've changed it to the droplet, then you've changed the consumer experience. So whether you're changing the problem or whether you're solving the problem entirely, it's important to always look at one of these bottom two solutions rather than just focus on something that is very short term. So how can this solution to your product be tested to see if it's actually a good one? Let's imagine you all think that you have a structural solution, but there's a couple of people you should be speaking with, and believe it or not, it's not going to be your mother or even potentially me. Who you should be asking are going to be 4 different entities. There's 4 different groups who you should be continuously communicating with throughout your customer journey. You'll notice that a lot of giant companies made the mistake of not communicating with each of these 4 groups. Unless you communicate with each of these 4 groups, you're stabbing yourself in the foot. You're decreasing your chance of success. Why should you be speaking with friends, colleagues, and family? Because they're going to be the source of positive motivation, of inspiration for you, and they're going to be the ones who will test your product. They're going to be definitely the people most likely to sit down with you and walk through your solutions. Version 1, version 10, version 100 of your product, whether it's a service, whether it's a solution, whether it's a dashboard, they're going to be the ones who will give you patient feedback. Secondly, you need to be speaking to your target customers. It doesn't matter if your solution is 1/1,000,000th of what you're building towards. You might be building the most comprehensive dashboard to measure emissions in the world, but if you never speak to somebody who will actually buy it, what you're building is just a dream. It's not actually something that the market needs. The best way to get feedback is speak to somebody who you imagine yourself selling to. If you're building an e-commerce platform for shoes, speak to a shoe marketplace. Ask them, what would you like to see? Imagine this product existed. What would they want to see? Don't be afraid of them giving you feedback. They're not going to build this e-commerce product. They're not going to go after you. They're going to tell you exactly what they want from you. And that's what you really need to focus on. Now, when you approach these target customers, I mean, you have this positive affirmation from your friends and family, remember something that's continuously going on, then you can start approaching the bottom 2 groups. The bottom 2 groups, I would really not recommend reaching there until you've at least got some feedback. But these are the 2 groups that potentially will give you the biggest jump. Firstly, it's current active startup founders. Startup founders that could be in your industry, that could be in an affiliated industry, or that could be in an entirely different industry. They're going to talk to you through the actual way that they solve their problem, through the actual way they evolve their problem and the solution that came with that problem to be structural and to be actually a significant placement, something that fits together like a puzzle. You don't want to have a solution that only solves 1% of the problem. And most founders will realize that through iteration and iteration and iteration. Don't make the same mistakes they did and learn from them. Be honest, allow them to criticize your startup, and you'll save yourself 6 months. Secondly, speak to early stage venture capitalists. VCs are not a lottery. You don't come in and they say yes or no forever. Most of the venture capital industry is oriented around the idea that these are people who invest in highly risky ideas. And every VC everywhere around the world is going to be seeing hundreds of new ideas every month. None of them ever have the time to steal your idea. Most of them see all those ideas and just store it inside because that's their job. They need to store it and see whichever one is the best one. But every time you approach an early stage VC, you can use them. Even if they're not giving you funding, don't use that like a lost opportunity. Try to turn it on its head. Ask them for specific feedback. Ask them what they would want you to build in the industry. You'll be surprised by how much insight the VC would have. You might approach them and be the first person to ask them for feedback, and they might have seen 100 competitors that you never even knew about. They'll tell you their honest thoughts. They'll tell you about those competitors. They'll tell you how you can do better than those competitors. And moreover, they're going to tell you what you can do to get to the stage where you're interesting to the VC. Who else is going to give you that direct feedback? A bank certainly wouldn't. A debt institution certainly wouldn't. So make the most of it. If you do get to the stage of approaching VCs, ask for feedback always. Now, beyond that, it's as we near kind of the wrap up of my short presentation, I'll leave you just with 4 core areas of what you should really be thinking about. And what you should be thinking about are 4 steps: validating your market demand, validating the feasibility of potential market supply against your potential supply, iterating on adapting to these trends, and remembering commercialization. This is going to apply to all of the startups in this cohort. First, validating market demand. There's a lot of things you can do towards validating market demand, but the first and foremost is speak to those 4 groups we mentioned. If your family doesn't believe it, if your startup entrepreneurs that you speak with don't believe it, if your VCs are telling you that this idea is crazy, it's never going to work, and if the target customers you speak with, the people who would buy this product, all tell you that this idea isn't something they need right now, then maybe this is not the right idea for you to be working on right now. Validate your market demand with the customer specifically. Secondly, when you're validating your market supply, think about whether you are in the right place, in the right position to be trying to build this solution. If you're building something complicated, something that has a global production chain, something that has a global supply chain, something where you're dependent on other entities, don't just assume that everything is going to go to plan. Don't assume that everyone's going to want to partner with you, everyone's going to work together towards building a better future. Unfortunately, the world isn't like that. What does that mean? Always try to assess how you can improve the market supply. Maybe there's something vertically before you, someone who's supplying something to you that can be improved. Maybe there's something after you, someone who's buying something from your customers that can be improved. Maybe there's something you can do in the wider market that can pave the way for your success. Make sure to research that and really dive deep into that as an assessment of feasibility, whether your industry and your market is even ready for your startup in the first place. And this also relates to your potential supply. One of the first ways that most investors and partners who are going to judge you they're going to judge not just your problem and your vision. They're going to judge whether you have picked the right team to solve on this problem and this vision. So if you have an idea where you're going, your vision, you have an idea of what needs to be done, you have an issue, the problem that exists right now, and you've proven this through your speaking with customers, then the next step of building your solution, you need to make sure that you're building the right solution, not just anything that will work. And it doesn't matter how many steps it takes to build that solution. The first step you do is finding the right team and finding the right people to build alongside you. And that's really just part of validating not just the market's supply, but also your supply as somebody who has an entrepreneurial background. Make sure you're adapting to trends and feedback that you hear from your customers, and always, always, always remember commercialization. One of the biggest issues startups make that almost nobody talks about is not failing to raise capital. It's failing to figure out a good business model. So many startups crash and burn because their business model isn't one that can really scale. Either it's not replicable, or it's not going to work on the global scale, or for instance, it has core issues like the WeWork we touched on earlier, which still doesn't make money even 10 years now after its foundation. So always try to remember commercialization and how you're going to make money, and keep that as a back thought towards complementing your problem, your solution, and the vision of where you're going. All right. Finally, I'll just leave you with a final thought to remember that startup founders set out to search for the right business model that scaled to enormous heights in a massive market as fast as possible. If you believe you're a startup founder, you should be looking for the right business model that's possible to scale to enormous heights in a huge market driven by a huge problem, and to get there as soon as possible. If you can do all of these, then you're definitely on the right track. And with that, I'll pause for today.